Welcome to Crossroads and Cauldrons. We are two witches with jobs, families, and busy lives just like you. We talk about weaving the web of community, practicing magic, and life in the Deep South. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Selena, and you're listening to Crossroads and Cauldrons podcast. We have a super special guest with us today. His name is Ivo Dominguez Jr. You've heard me talk about him before on the show, and now he's here to talk about himself. So let me let you know who he is if you're not familiar with his work. Ivo has been active in the Wicca and Pagan community since 1978. He's been teaching since 1982. He was a founding member and past high priest of Keepers of the Holly Chalice, the first coven of the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel, which is a Wiccan syncretic tradition that draws inspiration from astrology, Qabala, and Western Magickal Tradition, and the folk religions of Europe. So I have seen him teach several times in various different places, and I'm deeply, deeply happy that he's here. Hello, Ivo.
I'm really happy to be here, too. I love talking.
Wonderful. Great. This is going to be a good show then. So I met you. The first experience I had with you was at Temple Fest 2016.
Right.
And you were talking about astrology. And at that point, I didn't know anything at all about astrology. I mean, you know, I knew like the signs in the paper. That's all I knew.
Sure.
But the way you presented the information was really fascinating, and it made connections that I hadn't made before. So I started a deep dive after that. So thank you for that.
I'm glad to hear that.
And then I saw you the next year at Temple Fest talking about time.
Right.
And that was fascinating. I went back and looked at my notes to see, you know, like the exact title of the presentation, and I have like one page notes, and then I got to yours and it was like 7 pages of notes. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, if I recall, that was a magical perspective on time.
And that's exactly what it was. It's fantastic. And I saw you at Mystic South as well, which is great. You're going to be at Mystic South this coming summer. Is that correct?
I plan on it. I enjoyed that event.
Wonderful. Well, hopefully I will see you there. So let's talk about you a little bit. So one of the things that really captures me about your work is it's so infinitely practical. You know, you take the deep dives, you know, and the vast, you know, explorations and the theory and philosophy and all of that stuff. And then you bring it right back and you say, here's what you can do with it right now while you're reading this today. Right. And I love that. Talk to us about your practical approach.
So one of the things from my very earliest days was I always wanted to know why something worked. I love lore, I love mythology, but for me, understanding or a guesstimate of what the mechanism of action is for something is so important. And that means theory is important to me, but the only reason to have the theory is so you can actually do something with it. So I always try to blend the two together. It depends on the person, whether it comes across as too theory heavy or too exercise and practice heavy. But honestly, I can't see doing one without the other. Now, that's probably because I'm looking at it as a witch. And as a witch, I like to do things rather than being a armchair occultist.
Well, there's no point in understanding why something works if you're not going to use it. And there's no point in using something if you don't know why it works. In my thought.
Yeah. Well, if you don't know how it works, then you can't modify it as safely or as effectively.
Right. I mean, you could still use it. It would still work and be useful. But unless the situation isn't exactly, you know, what that technique is prescribed for. Right. That's awesome. You know, I'm a maker. I'm creative, and my husband calls me MacGyver because whenever something breaks, I can usually fix it with whatever I have around the house. So I'm reading your work. It makes me feel like that because you've put in enough work and you understand and have a relationship with all of the things that are around you, so you can craft whatever you need in that situation with whatever's laying around energetically for you. So you're like the MacGyver of the mysteries. And I love that about you. So how do you get where does this creative drive come from? Because I every time I'm reading your work,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh my gosh, it's right there, and it would never have occurred to me in 1,000 years.
You know, honestly, I think it comes from a couple of sources. One, I don't consider myself an artist, a musician, anything, but I draw, I paint, I write chants, I've sculpted, I've built things. The house I'm living in is partly built by builders, but mostly built by us and friends. So I've had a lot of practice of actually using and doing things in the world. And uh, one of my first scientific loves was geology, which and also botany, but that meant that I always looked at the world as small things that hook together to make larger things that have relationships to each other. So I'm constantly looking at everything and saying, how can I understand that? What are the things does that connect to? How does that relate to whatever I'm reading today? People will go like, well, how did you? I made some food really fast for a potluck dinner. My other half is goes to returned Peace Corps volunteer meetings because it's a thing. And they have a monthly dinner, and he can't cook, so I cook and give him stuff. Here, take this. And I basically said, what do we have in the kitchen? Because I hadn't gone shopping. And I throw things together, and as I'm throwing things together, I'm going like, this is how long this takes to cook. These are the flavors. If I can, and I visualize it, I taste in my head while I'm cooking, so that I'd hardly ever taste the food. And people go, how do you know it tastes like? I know what each of those things taste like. So it's about living in a way that you fully engage with the senses, the things that you do, and constantly bring the theories and the overarching perspectives back in. And suddenly everything begins to connect to other things.
I like that in your book, which we're going to talk about more a little bit later on. But that's sort of exactly what you're doing with your book of elements, which we're going to talk about in a minute. I keep trying to
Yeah.
jump ahead. Um, what was I going to say? Oh, you said something there that I think is a key. You were talking about how you know what each of those flavors
Hmm. Hmm.
tastes like because you've used it before, because you've
Right.
singled it out before, and you know how they're going to blend together because you've experimented and you've
Hmm.
practiced with those things. And I think that's the part that can be missing when all you have is the theory and you haven't like gotten your hands dirty with the techniques before.
Yeah, and you can be as people go, well, are your rituals all, and spell work and everything planned to the ninth degree? And it's like, well, you know what? Some things are, and I've got like ridiculous notes where I have, multiple columns where I write, this is what we're doing, but this is what it's actually doing on an inner plane or energetic level. This is what you have to be visualizing, blah, blah, blah. And there's other stuff that looks really spontaneous, but I'm going to say that the best spontaneous stuff isn't. It's the outcome of all the work that you did before that's just below the surface waiting to pop up. And the example I usually give is that if you've listened to musicians that just get together, they don't even know each other that well, and they start jamming, and one chord leads to another, or the rhythm changes, and they know how to make the shift to the rhythm and change the key and ever and they know which riffs go together. Why? Because they have done this so many bazillion times before that it is like muscle memory when you're riding a bicycle or knitting or whatever. And the most beautiful spontaneous things are the result of all the work that you've put in beforehand.
That's an excellent analogy because it looks like they just sat down and it just happened, but it didn't happen. It
Oh
happened
no.
after years and years and years of
Right.
practice and study.
Right.
Well, that's wonderful. So let's talk for just a minute because you do teach and you travel around, as I mentioned. So you have really during the COVID. I know, when are we going to stop talking about this? One day, but not today.
Not today.
So no, clearly. So you have given so much of yourself during COVID, with recordings and meditations and path workings and online classes and readings and all of those things. And I have attempted to do that, and I finally reached the place where I was like, I'm tired. But the first part of 2020,
Hmm.
I was trying to keep that momentum from in person going, and
Hmm.
it just kind of fizzled out. So how have you, how are you feeling now? How has the experience of not being physically in person with people, how has that changed your practices? And like, what have you learned? How's your practice grown from that experience?
Okay. Firstly, I'll say I'm not a fan because I'm one of those, big extroverts that hit, the needle pegs E on any test I take. So yeah, I get it. I need people. So, and there's only so much you can do with Zoom and whatnot. So, uh, I have spent a lot of time listening to music, looking at recordings of concerts or events online as a way of getting the feel of being connected. And honestly, a lot of the, I told somebody else this, and it's kind of like a bizarre thing. If I need a dose of energy that extroverts need, I'll go, okay, I'm going to jump on, for example, YouTube and look for reactions to a song or a band that I really like. I'll listen to people reacting to it, and I will tune into the echoes of all the enjoyment and all the energy of people that have been listening to it or are currently listening to it in that moment and reacting to it to try to connect to that group feel. Uh, and that helps. Our covens have been doing Zoom things, and also as a tradition, we've done a couple of get-togethers as tradition-wide as well. And honestly, we've learned a lot of techniques of how to do at a distance ritual. Not that weren't already doing those to a degree, but to a much greater degree. And I may write up some bullet points on things that make it more magical and less social. Not that the social part is bad, but there are ways to make magic work at a distance. But truthfully, I was just in Ohio. I was in Columbus and Cleveland, did a thing at Witch Lab and at the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft. And that was the first trip I've taken to teach since all this started. I was masked up the whole time. I've got the shots and boosted. So I figured if I'm really careful, I can do this. And the classes, they spaced out people really far apart and limited the number, blah, blah, blah. Man, it felt good. But what I found was that I appreciated the joy and the benefit of being in person even more, finally having had a small taste of it. But I do think that for a lot of people, what COVID times have shown is how important it is to figure out how to do something every day. And it may not be the same thing. And honestly, I always say that consistency is more important than duration or quality. So if you can only do 5 minutes a day, that's way better than saying, oh, I can't do anything today because I can't set aside an hour to do my stuff.
I agree with that completely. I think I have noticed that as well. I think at the beginning we tried to make it the same, and it wasn't. And I think we were diminishing what was possible by trying to make it into something different. And there
Yep.
were things about that particular method of connecting with people that had their own mysteries
Mhm.
to uncover. And I think that
Mhm.
was, I had some growth there. But I think for some coming together, the social draws them to a place where they're, in that sacred space, and they're not necessarily doing that at home at all, maybe,
Right.
or not very often. So for me, I had a daily practice, so that I didn't have those issues, but I have watched people sort of feel like they've sort of dispersed, drifted,
Mhm. Mhm.
and they definitely are feeling that need to come together. So I'm looking forward to, we're hosting our very first Yule ritual since
Mhm.
2 years
Right.
ago,
Right.
and trying to take all the precautions, and we'll see. Fingers crossed. I'll see how that feels. I'm lucky because I still have my students every month, so I have that. It's
Right.
not quite the same, but we're connected because we've been together for years. So
Yes.
that feels better to me than open public, rituals and things where maybe people don't have a thread of connection already. But anyway, but you've got something coming up in person in next month. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a joint conference. Sacred Space is an annual conference that happens in Maryland, and the Between the Worlds conference that we host happens every several years when the astrology is suitable. It's first one was in '96, and they've happened 3 to 7 years apart, depending. And originally it was scheduled for 2020, and the original goal actually had been, the main ritual is always a big deal at this event, to shield, ward, empower, protect people because we knew bad, difficult times were coming. Unfortunately, it was faster than our capacity. It had been about a month. We were about a month too late for it to get away with doing it. So it got rolled over, and now the hotel said, "Hey guys, it's time to do this because we've postponed your event twice, and the contract's going to be called in." So we're doing it, and it is a amazing event when it happens. Sacred Space is fabulous, and I recommend it. But when it's the joint event, it's got a wider range of teachers and more offerings, which in a way helps because that means we're going to be spreading people out between more rooms, which is also going to be helpful for the safety matters. And everybody's going to be required to be vaccinated to attend because we're more concerned about safety, and if somebody is making the choice not to do what they can to protect others, then they don't need to be present.
I mean, I'm right there with you on that. So
We have had some complaints about that, and there are one or two people that are actually truly allergic to the vaccines, which is extremely rare. And they're going to be getting tested before, during. I think there's like 3 of them, and they're going to be required to be masked the entire time and to be tested continuously during the event.
that's good for their safety that you're
Absolutely
taking such precautions.
And the other bit I'm going to say about the people say, oh, the quick testing is crap, blah blah blah. Here's the thing: the quick testing is not as good as the slower one. However, if you test positive on the quick test, that means your viral load is high enough that you are truly contagious to others. So it's not a measure. It's not necessarily accurate for whether or not you have COVID, but it does give you the red light for it. This person is truly contagious.
Right. And it's definitely better than nothing at all, which is the alternative
Sure,
in that
sure.
situation.
But I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to other events that hopefully, if all goes well, I'll be at Convocation, I'll be at Summer Magic in Florida, and then at Mystic South in Atlanta.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back into. I say that now. I may be bloody exhausted by the end of it, and think, "Wow, how did I do this before?"
Right.
But I'm ready for some festivals. I'm ready.
Yeah. I think the one thing missing, and then I'll shut up for a moment, about the
No, please
festival,
don't.
the festival scene is that it's not just access to people and the teachings and the rituals and so on, but for the span of time that people are gathered at a campground or at a hotel or whatever, we do put up a little bubble that shields us from the prevailing winds of the group mind of the culture that says this is foolish, this doesn't work. And sometimes particular kinds of insights and magic and even thought only comes into being when you're sheltered, because the rest of the time the world around us is trying to prevent us. And one of the ways I find that is when I teach something at a festival and people totally get it, and a week later they can't piece it back together because they're no longer shielded. They're no longer in the atmosphere of others of like mind. And it's not just people's forgetfulness, so that's part of it. But a good piece of it is simply that during that time we are protected by the minds of all those that are with us, so that we can actually truly see it as it is, rather than having it be scuffed up by the prevailing group minds around us.
No, I think that's an excellent point. And every time you're in a closed space like that, it always feels like sort of a larger scale of, the magic circle. You've
Yeah.
created this sacred space. And usually if it's a good conference, if it's well organized, they have literally created
Right.
a container for the festival. But when you're in that space, just like when people have, they've done a ritual, they've done a journey, they remember it in the moment, but they come out it's like a dream. It starts to fade.
Mhm.
So yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Um, and you have the power of so many people,
Yeah.
feeding the engines, of whatever the purpose is of that
Right.
particular event,
Right.
that's awakening things and activating things that you may not be able to do simply on your own or in a smaller group setting. So
Mhm.
yeah, I'm with you on that. So one of the things that let's talk about your book. Your latest book
Mhm.
is The Four Elements of the Wise, and I have to
Yep.
tell you, when I saw this announced, I literally squealed because I did. I sounded like a little piglet. It was great. Um, this is how I was taught to approach the elements, and I have not seen this.
Mhm.
I've not seen an entire book on this, and I've seen very little other teachings, at least in modern literature,
Yeah.
from this perspective. So I was
Mhm.
very, very excited. Um, and and the fact that you've spent an entire book unpacking these forces and sort of how they're expressed and how they're embodied, within nature, within the cosmos.
Mhm.
What brought you to write this book at this time?
All right. So I'll tell you the good stuff and the bad stuff.
Okay, let's go.
All right. So it wasn't the book I wanted to do next. However, I was being nudged by other people for that to be the next book. And honestly, the way I look at my writing is not for me, it's for others. So if others are nudging me, no, no, Evo, we really want this book next. Okay, fine. So I put the other one on hold. I was like, halfway, two-thirds of the way finished with the other one. And everybody was like, no, we need the other one first. And I did it. But it really was, in my mind, part of the continuation of what I've done with my other books. In my head, all my books are really big chapters in the big book of what I've learned along the way. So the things in the book are things that I have taught in classes, at events, to our covens, and so on. But those are all separate little bits and not collected in one place. So this way, if anyone ever needs to, well, what does Evo have to say about the elements? It's all in one place, more or less. The other bit is that I do get, well, as you also know, astrology is a big thing for me, and astrology has also the four elements as one of its, building blocks. And it seems that over the years, the quick and easy access to the short version of descriptions for any and all things about the elements has become really predominant, and that's okay. I'm glad that it's all available. But unfortunately, because a lot of people do not have access to easily in their community or haven't found the right teacher online or whatever, they tend to find the same bits again and again and again. And my concern isn't that that's all they're that not just that that's all they're getting, but if that happens consistently, and it's also true for some other practices and other bits of knowledge, then after a while a certain kind of disillusionment sets in. Is that all there is? And actually, my biggest fear for the broader magical pagan heathen, what keyword, as Laura Tempest Zakharov likes to say, community, is that because it's so easy to find the quick and easy stuff, it's really easy for people to think that that's the limit of things, and it diminishes expectations. And it's I don't like it when people think I'm done.
I like that about you. I have a similar problem. It may be a Sagittarius thing. I don't know. I have a
Probably.
stellium in Sagittarius, so
Hmm.
I'm always digging. There's no answer ever. Um, but I'm glad that you did this because I teach from this perspective. So I'm adding your book to my required reading. Sorry,
Thank you.
Witchcraft 2. But it's going to be added to the reading for my elemental classes. But I see so much that people are, working with the elements. It's constantly there, but it's
Right.
not. It seems very surface, and it seems like it seems like it's so often just related to the physical,
Hmm.
as if that's all of it, as if that's not a gateway to what's beyond.
Right.
So I'm deeply, deeply pleased that you wrote this book, because it's really not, it's not out there in a complete form like that. And not to say that okay, don't be offended. Not to say that this is a complete, because continued exploration
Sure.
from individual practitioners, and can anything really be complete in human knowledge? I don't know, probably not. But
No.
a very full collection. And I really liked your take on Quintessence.
Right.
Let's talk about that, because I haven't seen that broken out into, the three worlds, specifically written down this way. So talk to us about that. I'm excited.
All right. So that it's kind of a sideways. How I got to this is actually water, as in physical water and the rain cycle, and how water can be solid, can be liquid, can be vapor, can be a plasma, it could be a lot of things, right?
Mhm.
And I said, but it's still water. Well, there's this broad, amorphous thing that people will use the words ether, spirit, quintessence, and several other words kind of interchangeably. And I said, for me, the connection I made was, well, it has to be like water. It's the same thing, but these are the different phase change forms of it, or that they are, or it's what happens under particular conditions that it becomes this. And it made sense to me that as part of a broader cycle of, death rebirth cycle, or for geeks that do tree of life, that came into my mind, or hermetics, right? So, of course, there is a cycle that's up and down and around, which means that there is, a transcendent force, there's an eminent force, there's the place in which we are, where the things meet in the middle. Hence, we're getting off into the land of three worlds. So, of course, so that it's summarized in my head as ether is what we call it when the four elements come back together to become the one thing on the path of return upwards. And spirit is what happens when it descends in the process of splitting back into the four. And the place where the two meet and is constantly shifting and changing is quintessence, and is the thing that in my mind is mind. And actually, the place where the two meet is what binds mind to brain in incarnation. So it just turned into a bunch of images and just comparing it to all the other things, like how do they link up? How do they link up? And it turned into an understanding of the three things being the one thing, but in different places or in different phases.
I really liked your take on that, especially, we learn about it,
Mhm.
emanating forth, and this
Right.
is spirit. It breaks out into the elements, and then it comes back. When they come back together, that's spirit again, to use words interchangeably.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, I really like that you have differentiated them, because the whole point of it going forth, dividing, is to learn and evolve. And when it comes back, it's bringing what has changed. It's bringing those transformations back with it. So it's got to be different in that moment,
Right.
and then it emanates out again. And it's a cycle that everything that we understand in the physical universe goes through, like
Mhm.
even the
Mhm.
rocks and stones go through a cycle. So I really loved that you took that, and broke it down and found its cycle, and it made a lot of connections for me. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, the problem is that we don't have separate words for all these things, or there's no grand council that writes the dictionary of magic. And we'd probably
Thank
fight if,
goodness.
and we'd probably be picketing them if they did. But we have to define terms so that we can have a little bit more nuance in describing these things. And for me, that weird thing that we experience as consciousness, whether it's regular consciousness or more exalted consciousness when we're doing magical work or meditating or whatever, that's got to be informed by both spirit and ether, from that is descending and that is rising. And because otherwise, why would we be in these bodies?
Right. That's wonderful. I think of that place like that's not a wholly new concept, but the emanation, the rising and the
Hmm.
descending, you know what I'm saying,
Yeah, yeah,
meeting in that place. I don't think I've looked at it from that perspective, but that's kind of what that crossroads feels like.
it
Um,
is.
you know what she means.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is because consciousness is completely a liminal thing. I mean, completely a liminal thing. I mean, even if you look at it from a more neurosciency kind of perspective, I mean, we're taking all the information from our senses and cleaning up the signal, summarizing it a little bit, and then creating this, analog inside our mind, and that's how we experience reality. That's kind of a crossroadsy liminal kind of thing. I mean, our consciousness is a moving portal.
Yeah, and it's not contained within like our head
No.
where we perceive it and
Yeah.
process it,
Hmm.
but our consciousness is throughout our entire bodies and
Right.
beyond.
Right.
If you're a hermeticist, but which I am, so.
Yep.
But I think that we have not done, or at least not in modern occultism. We don't talk about that as much. It's kind of in vagaries, but literally we embody that in
Hmm.
every cell of our body. So how do we activate that? How do we work with that? How do we communicate with that thing, which is all things? See, now I'm sounding like
Hmm.
a lunatic, but they understand.
No, no, it makes sense. Honestly, this is the track that took me to the the reason that we have magical power at all is because we're made out of elementals. Not just the elements, but elementals. I mean, I believe that we are made out of these things, and in the same sense that the cells in our body, lung cells are doing what they do, heart cells are doing what they do, blood cells are doing what they do. So they have identity and uniqueness, but they're working in harmony to create this thing that's us. And at a spiritual level, we're also made out of the forces, forms, essences that are the elements, and also we're also made out of elementals. And the reason I say that is that if is that if the force is present, if the element is present, then consciousness is present. If you want to go the Hermetic or animist way, which means we are a colony, a group mind, a group hive organism. Then if you look at it from the perspective of that, so when somebody calls up fire energy, where do you think that comes from? From the fire elementals and the fire that's in us. And like calls to like, so that when we wake up the elementals that live within us, the elementals that live out in the world go, hey.
I love that perspective because I think I've thought about the cells in our own body,
Hmm.
operating as individual
Hmm.
parts. That's kind of how I think about angelic orders, which is a
Yeah,
different
yeah, yeah.
conversation.
But
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 um,
comparable.
yeah, but I hadn't thought about all of the spaces and things in between that are not
Mhm.
necessarily made of my blood and made of
Right, right.
my genetic material. But there's a whole ecosystem within, and there's an ecosystem without. And I hadn't thought of it in a literal way. I've thought about it in like a kumbaya sort of way.
Oh,
But
oh, but it makes sense once you begin to look at it that way.
yeah, and the fact that it's literally true.
Hmm.
Is very interesting, very interesting. Because I think of the earth, like we talk about Gaia and we talk about the consciousness of the planet and those sorts of things. And I think that's a hive mind. That's a combination of
Hmm.
everything that lives on and within and
Hmm.
as part of that. And you can, divide it out and
Sure,
pare it
sure.
down until you just get to its essence. But it's still, as it works together, it's
Hmm.
a whole ecosystem. So to think of ourselves as not only part of that ecosystem, but also our own different ecosystem and what sort of consciousnesses are residing in there. So I have more connections to make within.
So at the beginning, you asked what perspectives or tools do you use to find insights? I
Mhm.
look at so it's you fake it until you make it. I pretend that the things I read about and believe in are actually real. And it sounds like a stupid
Right?
thing to say, but when you actually go, okay, the elements are real, elementals are real, I'm made out of stuff. Holy crap, I'm made out of them. They have to be part of me. In the same way that the flora and fauna in my gut are a part of me. So if you add up all the things that are you, you should be, and I'm doing the should. I know you shouldn't should on people, blah blah blah, but I'm going to do it anyway in this case. If
Okay, we'll
if
allow it.
if you buy the idea of microcosm and macrocosm, and here you have the whole Earth, Gaia, as an organism, and we are a small scale representation of that. Well, if I look out in the world and I say there's elements and elementals in that world, then there have to be in the small world. So anytime I run across an idea that I apply to other realms of reality or the physical world or the greater earth around me, I go, well, where is that in me too? Because if it's out there, then it has to be here. And if it's not here, then it won't be there either.
Right. You know, that takes my brain to thinking about, if that's true, then the planet that we're on, of course, is also a cell in a greater being. And what's that? Is that what we're looking for? Or is that just another, I'll do the nesting doll thing forever?
Yeah. Well, I think it is. I think it is. Though my take on it is, and it's just my take, that we have limited bandwidth as individuals.
Agreed.
So past in the same way that if I ask somebody to imagine 10 dots in front of them, they might be able to. There are lots of people, they get blurry and it goes down to like 7 dots or 8 dots or whatever. But if I ask you to actually imagine 100 dots, you can't do it. You basically fake it. You fake it by having your inner eye, gaze across 10 rows or do some.
That's exactly what my brain was doing.
Right? Because
like 10 times 10, it's fine.
Right. And that works up to a point, but you've now left the realm of actually holding it in your mind and are now
and you're creating
it, and you're also summarizing it. So instead of actually doing 100 dots, you're writing down the number 100 and pretending that you see the 100 dots. So it becomes completely representational rather than true experience. So when we talk about beings past a certain scale, we can talk about them, we can write pretty poems about them, we can draw cool diagrams and beautiful paintings, but we have left the realm of actually experiencing them and are now in the extremely speculative or the extremely abstracted way of approaching them.
Right. And it becomes not necessarily particularly useful at that point, but you can go the other way too and go backwards and get smaller and smaller. And
yes,
those are the ones that, because they relate to those enormous concepts, those are the ones you can touch. And those are the ones you can use to activate. And that's kind of what you're saying with the elements within operating as a key to call to the elements without.
And in a very silly way of describing it, it's so since you mentioned kids earlier, I'll riff off of that. So let's say that a small kid toddles up and they know that there is a cookie that they want in the jar on the counter, and the counter is like miles above them, relatively speaking. So they they look for a kid that's bigger than them. Can you reach that? And the kid says no. But that kid's a little bit older and a little bit more persuasive and verbal. So they find an adult who is willing to open the jar and grab the cookie and bring it down from heaven into their little hands. And in some cases, that's what we're doing when we work with the elements or with smaller, less expansive beings. But sometimes if you're a toddler, you need the older sibling that can make out what you're saying to be the one that actually placed the request.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not diminishing any of the amazing things that all the different systems of magic accomplish, but I also try to remind myself that we are small.
Very, very small.
Very small. And the beings that we work with are very vast and also ancient by any imaginable comparison to our brief lives, even if you throw in all our past lives, if you believe in those. So, yeah. there's a limit to how much bigger or older something can be before it ceases to be productive for us to work with it.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that. I'm
The
still very
elements
curious, though.
the elements break the rule, but, yeah, I am
Mhm.
too, and I don't mind. But I always like to say I've overused this phrase. I will continue to use it. There's a big difference between looking at the moon in the sky and actually touching it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the map is not the terrain.
It is not.
You can you can
Though I
look at
like
the
the
map,
maps.
but I like the map. They're
I like the
helpful.
map.
They can guide you through the terrain, but
Yeah.
it's not the same. It's not the same perspective as
No.
literally walking that path.
Right.
Keep using that because it cannot be overemphasized.
And it's really easy to fool yourself that seeing and perceiving something is the same as communing or touching it, but it's not.
Right. Agreed. And or exploring the relationship.
Right.
Because there's
Right.
more than what's presented to you the first time you experience something. Just like with people,
Oh, yeah.
like there's so much more to you than we're gonna learn in this hour interview. Beyond that, so that leads us right into my next question. Well done. One of the things that I really enjoy about your work, I enjoy about your speaking, is the function of practice, of experimentation, of it feels like play to me when I'm reading your work, especially when you put your little asides of, well, I was just gonna do this because I didn't want my ice to melt or whatever it happens to be. There's so much joy and playfulness in the experimentation process. What's that like for you? Are you just like you're a Sag. You're probably just optimistic and playful, just in general. Is that part of your personality? Or?
Yeah, I will say I have the weebles wobble, but they don't fall down energy that many Sages have. I mean, you can push me, but I always bounce back up.
I call that Labrador Retriever energy. I bring the puppy energy for sure.
That is absolutely there too. It also actually the Labrador Retriever energy maybe works better because no matter what happens, and I'm a news junkie, I still end up liking people and having hope for the world, despite the fact that every day,
despite the things that they do
every day, in the same way that dogs look at us like we have hope for humans. I don't know how, but
we don't deserve them.
Oh my god, yeah, they're amazing beings. But I do experiment, and it's okay if I have a dozen notebooks with scribbled things that didn't work out. That's fine. That's the only way and believe me, I'm also experimental when I bake. And if you want to have potential for brilliance or disaster, yeah.
Come visit when you're baking.
Right. It's like, this is either going to be amazing or I'm going to have to throw it out. But the process is important because I don't forget that things or have limits that way. I think as a Sag, I'm going to say I would get in trouble if I lived in theory land all the time without getting my hands dirty, because it's only
which is easy to do,
really easy to do. And it's like, ooh, let me wait. I've now downloaded more books and have a big pile of books by my desk that I don't know when I'm going to get to, but I'm due, and I do the horrible, everybody's asleep. I slowly sneak out of bed and read for like 2 or 3 hours that I shouldn't have when I actually need sleep. But
I understand. I literally had to move a huge pile of books off my desk before this interview, and I was like, I need to read these.
Right.
But it'll happen one day.
But I think the other thing is that I've developed a pattern of testing everything. Once it looks like, hey, there's some promise with this, I pretend, I take on the practice of looking at it from a almost a science development methodology. Not completely. It's more like halfway between science and creative writing, but you polish it, you work on it, and then only when it hasn't blown up in your own face several times do you ask your trusted other practitioners, do you want to try this to see if you get similar results? And actually on my, I think it's still up, on my classes page on my website, I left up a free lecture anybody can download that talks about my process for research and development doing magic.
Oh,
So
wow. I'm going to have to check that
yeah,
out.
yeah. And it's, you know, it wasn't like a very formal class, but it still gives you a glimpse into a process. But honestly, one of the biggest problems I see in broader community is people come up with something and they don't actually use it like a ritual or a technique. They don't actually use it often enough to polish it or to refine it or to debug it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
like, wow, that ritual worked really well. Oh, but it was written just for that one time. Well, okay, can we do it again anyway to see what we might modify in it? Or can any parts of it that were special, can we lift out that component and drop it into some other thing?
You know, that's, I think you're exactly right on that. And I see that a lot, especially when people, there's so much available. Thanks,
Right.
internet. But
Which is
also at the
great.
same time, thanks a lot, internet. There's so much available. But yeah, when a ritual seems, yeah, either for that moment or that person in that moment,
Right.
or just unfinished, you know, and I just wrote, our Yule ritual that we're going back in person for the first time. I think I might have mentioned that.
Yep.
Um, and it's been a while since I've written a public ritual. I've been working on, you know, my solitary
Right.
stuff. So, you know, and yeah, you've got to go through it. You've got to work it several times. You've got to walk it several times. And every single time I'm like, we need that. That's not working right now. So let's take that out because it's not going to work for everybody. But yeah, refining. But that's, you know, it's kind of a key for your whole practice as
Mm-hmm.
well. You
Mm-hmm.
know, as you stumble upon and explore and experiment, continuing to work it with and continuing to refine how you work with certain things,
Mm-hmm.
and how they work together improves your skills, improves your practice and your relationships. Like learning any other sort of art or
Mm-hmm.
craft, you have to hone your abilities and your
Right.
skills. I think that's missing a fair bit. I think people tend to, oh, I feel catty right now. But I think people tend to jump from one thing to another, which am not above. I like to explore all the things,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes, you know, to my own detriment, if I don't let something percolate and I don't obsess over it for a while and refine it before I move on to the next thing, then it's sort of incomplete.
So this is a thing on process that we leave out in most discussions about it as magical people. And the way I usually like to describe it is, so we are vast beings anchored to these physical forms, and we're vast on the inside, blah, 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 all flowery. However, the part that's true is that each layer of self, whether it's layers of the aura, the Russian nesting dolls thing, or the parts of us that exist outside of linear time as well as in the deep earth, etc., it's like they live in different time zones, not
Mm-hmm.
and different time rates, frames of reference. And when you are processing, just because the local linear cognitive view is done does not mean that the rest of you has sent in its 2 cents or its report, because they're all processing in different rates. So that people say it takes time to integrate, it takes time to process, but they usually just limit that idea to that conscious middle self that's talking right now. But really, all those parts of you are also part of the work. And if you wait long enough, they'll have an opportunity to show up as an image, an intuition, a dream, a daydream that actually fills in the part that your regular day-to-day cognitive mind could not. And that's the part that's often missing. We don't give time for the rest of us to chime in.
And I think we exclude the physical
Mm,
as part of our
mm,
layers of consciousness as well. And
yeah,
how can we incorporate whatever the lesson is by literally doing the thing, you
right.
know, or crafting a ritual to embody the thing if it's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, just a concept that, you know, or finding that physical link as well. Because we forget, people tend to think we're you know, spiritual is separate from physical. But it isn't. It's part of that.
No, no,
It's
it's not. It's not. And one of the ways that I view, uh, so let's say that you had a bowl of water in front of you or a candle flame or whatever. And you could say, oh, well, that's a good representation of the element. And you can say, well, it actually is also the element, but it's more than that. It's the place that we are most likely to find. If you're looking in that water, if you're looking in that flame, that's the place that you're going to find the incarnation of that element. And I like to include the idea of not making beings that are different than us less than us.
mm-hmm.
All right, well, if I incarnate, then so do they, but it's going to be different than mine. So that every time I see a drop of water, a candle flame, feel a tug of breeze, feel a texture of any kind, I say I'm also touching the incarnation of the body, of the vessel, of the spirit that is that element. So that from that perspective, the whole manifest universe is basically the elements incarnate.
Mm-hmm.
Changes your relationship to them when you view them that way.
It does, and it really deeply, profoundly makes you look at how do we treat these embodiments, in our world and our environment around us. Not great as a whole society.
Well, yeah, but it also changed our relationship to. Even though I know a lot of magical folks that will name their things like their computer, their car, their bicycle, all in a lot of things, but
Mm-hmm.
there's many cultures that have a sense of objects having their own selfhood and their own beingness. And anything that's physical has all four elements in it. It exists in the physical world. It has all four elements. They may not be, in equal proportions and as it should be. But, and I'm bringing this up as my way of, I always got irritated when I would read the oldie moldy, especially ceremonial magic books, and they would talk about the elementals as lesser and how they don't have the fourfold nature like we do, so we're automatically superior. And I'm going like, well, you know what? My mug right here has the four elements because it exists in the physical world, so I'm not so sure that counts automatically makes humans stand out as extra special.
Well, the ceremonial perspective often puts humans right there at the tippy top or close to it.
Yeah. Hubris.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, mind you, I love a lot of the knowledge that comes to us from the ceremonial and Western magical traditions and so on. But every system has baggage, and I would say that's the baggage that I have to carefully remove and unpack from when I'm reading those materials, and also not throw them across the room, because just because I'm automatically and here's the other thing that I've learned over the years: no matter how strong a reaction I'm having because of spiritual, political, religious, fill in all the reasons when I'm reading something, so long as I know they actually know something, I'm going to force my way through it, and then I'm going to carefully tease out the parts that are knowledge that's knowledge that are not necessarily part of the things that I objected to. And a lot of times stuff gets pitched that really is valuable because it was written in a way that is to current modes of thinking offensive.
No, I agree with that. I think it's I don't see why we can't have there's a paradox there. We can look at something and say this is problematic, this is useful. You know what I mean? We can draw attention to all of these things at the same time. It doesn't have to be, let's throw this out, it's got this problematic feature.
What I would say, yeah, I would say some people don't have the emotional energy to do it. So though I encourage everybody to do it for themselves. If you can't, find your friend or teacher that is willing to do the tedious work of going through it and have them summarize the good points. Because it's one of these weird things, like I'm not telling everybody to take on emotional labor they don't want to take on. Mm-hmm. But what I'm saying is there is useful information even in sources that you go, I don't want to read that. Find somebody who has a close enough feeling for the world that you do, so they can tell you, okay, these are the parts that gleaned out of it that were useful, so you don't have to gag through 3/4 of it.
Part of my training, and I think it was really, really helpful, and I think everybody should do this at some point, was to expose ourselves to things that are antithetical to our
Absolutely.
beliefs, things that infuriate us, things that are totally different perspective, and really sit with it, sit with our reaction to it. Why is that? Why? What about this is causing this reaction within me? What about me
Yes.
is the problem, or is contributing to this? And what, if anything, can I find here that is useful? How can I understand from their perspective? And I think that's work that everyone should do at some point. It is emotionally full and difficult,
Yeah.
but I think we can do it. I think we have the capacity to shift our perspectives. At least, that's the whole work we're doing as witches, right? I keep hitting my microphone. I hope it's not making a sound. Our sound guy will rail at me later. But that was a fist. He's not going to do anything mean, but he'll say words that are mean. But anyway, I got off topic there. But no, I love that you do that. And even things that we find to be fluffy or surface or not very deep, there's something there to find. There's a perspective there. At the very least, it's a perspective that you don't have. So there's something to learn.
I'm all for fluff, light or dark fluff. But even though I will also sometimes cringe and have a reaction. But here's my take on it. Nature does this. Fish spawn and leave a bazillion eggs. Oak trees drop a bazillion acorns. We don't know which one of them is going to grow up to be something useful. And a lot of them don't. They just end up being composted back into nature or eaten by somebody else. And
which is useful.
Which is useful. So when I see all especially, and I force myself to do a lot of social media, and also to watch things like Fox News and all the other things just so that I know what they're doing. I know. Yeah. But it's also the way that some people will find their way into communities that they need to find, and that's their starting point because it's easier to find that stuff. And that's good. That's portals of entry. And B, this is going to sound wrong to some people, but the more the world is exposed to ideas about spirituality and magic, the more we will normalize it. So representation matters, and that means that the more people are actually talking about this, the easier it is for people to come after us to pursue magical pursuits. And people that rail against, but it will damage the true, bloody lineages and the true teachings. It's like, no, the people that are the keepers and the teachers of those will continue doing that, and the people that need to find their way to them will. So it does us good, even when it's annoying.
Yes. And, even when people are doing things that will potentially end up being harmful for them, or they'll learn things the hard way. I'm thinking particularly about witch talk, which I don't participate in, but, it's there. And I get annoyed with it.
But, am I hearing F around and find out in your head?
I mean, they will,
They
will. So, but you never know what the turning point will be for them or what the moment will be. I don't like disinformation, going out and new practitioners and vulnerable practitioners coming across things that they think they're hearing from someone who's knowledgeable, and then they fuck around and find out,
And
that hurts my feelings.
Yeah. And and the thing is, this is just more public. I mean, I don't think I tell this story too often, but my first coven was in high school that we put together, and we didn't know anything except we had access to lots of crazy books because our parents were professors at a university, and we had library cards that got us access to interesting books. So I can tell you, it is not a good idea junior year in high school for you and your coven to decide, I think we can summon demons. We've read this through. Sadly, unfortunately, something did show up and scared the crap out of us and actually impacted our lives for quite a few months afterwards until we finally managed to banish whatever it is that we had actually stirred up. The difference is now that It's happening in much larger numbers because of the availability of the information.
Yeah, and there seems to be a certain amount, because I've done some similar things in my youthful days, but there is a kind of, I don't know. Okay, this might be delusion. Let's find out. It seems like when you're seeking and it's hard to find information and you have to dig to find those particular things that are difficult and can be problematic if done incorrectly. Um, the people that are seeking to find that and stumble across it will, in my mind, they've done that much work to get there. They can probably work their way out of it, or will continue to seek until they figure it out. But with the ease of access, I could type anything into a search engine and boom, there it is. It mitigates some of the seeking that's needed to find things that will get yourself in trouble,
So,
you
so,
know?
so, my friend Katrina Messenger says this in a variety of different ways, but the short form of it is information is not knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And knowledge only comes from integrating it into yourself, applying it, and having a lived experience of that. And eventually knowledge turns to wisdom with enough lived experience. But I think that magically what happens if somebody has gone through a process of trying to search, summon, find particular things, in addition to having done the work ahead of time, they've also been building up a head of stream that is like a beacon to attract or to manifest, if you like that word, the teachers or situation or fellow seekers that are going to be able to help facilitate that process and make it into something real. So the act of longing and searching is a sort of unspoken spell for what you need.
I agree. I think there's a lot of mysteries just in the process of seeking, and in sort of words have disappeared from my brain. Breaking down, refining what it is you're actually seeking. That's a mystery in itself.
And there's some things that, believe me, I rely on YouTube a lot especially when I'm doing home repairs. Like, how do you do that? I think I know how to do that. But there are some things that I will teach online. I'll put into my books. But people go, "Don't you put everything into your books?" It's like, I put as much into the books as I think is reasonable to do that way. But there are some things I'm only going to ever teach in person with you right in front of me, because I need to be able to see what's happening to you. I need to be able to see what's happening to your energy in the same way that if you're learning dance or martial arts, there's some things you can teach yourself, but unless somebody's there to say, "Oh, okay, this is what I noticed in your form," or you were putting too much weight back on your heel, energetically speaking, it can't be done any other way. And there's some advanced shielding techniques that we teach people that we don't offer as a virtual, because part of the teaching of the process is put up your best shield and then having people intentionally try to breach it in unpleasant ways energetically.
Mm-hmm.
Because the only way you actually know if it's holding is if it's actually under strain.
Yeah. Or, if you're going to pull a psychic muscle or blow out a chakra, as one of my students likes to say.
Yeah. Well, anyway, but you get the point.
Yeah, I get the idea, for sure.
There are things that you really need to do in person, and preferably with somebody who has done it often enough that they also know what the injury feels like if you get it wrong.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully how to get you back from
and
that.
how to get you back from that. Yeah.
That's why I think that you have to have a solitary practice. You have to have your own practice, of
Absolutely.
course. But I think there's so much benefit to, at the very least, community. But and this is because it's my perspective, because I've done both. But formal training, there's not really a substitution for it, except just fumbling around and hurting yourself a lot until you figure things out. Which is what they did, and they're passing that down. So I feel like training is so important, and at the very least, community. So you have You have people holding a mirror, you have hopefully more experienced practitioners than yourself, to
Right.
help guide you. And then you're going to go further. That's my whole goal is,
Ideally.
yes, we're walking this well-worn path, sure, but my student's going to see something that I missed, and they're going to go off in that direction and explore something that I don't know, and they're going to take
Mm-hmm.
that path further.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole idea. So I think there's benefits to both
Mm-hmm.
perspectives of that.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, we've been chatting for quite a while. I've got just a couple more questions if you still have time.
I don't mind.
Sure. So what's coming up next for you? Like, what have you already got in the works?
So an editor somewhere is going to groan because I have a thing that I'm working on that I've signed a contract for and I'm not allowed to talk about yet. And then I've got two other books that I'm working on because I can't not that nobody has said yes to. So I can tell you about the two that are not protected by a non-disclosure. One is a ritual design book looking at the perspectives of what works in designing rituals as principles that are not locked to specific traditions or systems.
Interesting.
So it's not about cookie cutter or boilerplate, and it's not about these are the words we use, blah, blah, blah. It's more like these are the sorts of things that cause the following changes and then can be applied to whatever system or tradition, or even if it's your own stuff that's just you works. The other one is kind of like the flip side to my Keys to Perception book, but instead of being about psychic senses and perception, it's about raising, moving, shaping, managing energy. It's about all the active talents rather than the perceptive or receptive talents.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that because that's not widely talked about. I don't know if that's really talked about outside of in-person training. Interesting.
No.
That's very exciting.
And that's something that really does need to be talked about more. Honestly, it's not just a matter of safety and strength, but also it builds confidence when you can actually manage your energy. It also prevents people from scaring themselves or spooking themselves because they think that something that's simply the natural outcome of a particular kind of energy exhaustion can be, I'm under attack, somebody's cursed me, or there's some beastie from the ninth nether dimension that's chawing on my aura. No, no, you hurt yourself because you're exhausted or you're out of shape. You're a weekend warrior and you don't actually move energy often enough so that when you do move energy, your energy muscles are so sore the next day that you can barely go up the steps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's when you pull a chakra. Don't do it.
Exactly. My way of describing that is when you're exposed to too much energy and your aura gets a sunburn.
Oh, bless it. That hurt my feelings to think about.
Ouch.
But yeah. And we talk about raising energy and directing energy and all of those things, but what does that look like? What is that? How do you do that? And that's not, it's just kind of glossed over in a lot of the literature out there.
It is, or because they assume you're going to get it from somebody local.
Exactly.
And that's not always going to happen. Oh, by the way, during Zoom.
Or that you're going to feel it and experiment with it, but not everyone perceives energy in the same way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we've been doing in our Zoom work when we're actually doing work as opposed to devotional or celebrational or community stuff is we have a person who's good at energy work who becomes the focal point so that we aim all the energy that's being raised at that person and they in turn shape it and focus it to release it or to charge the altar or do whatever, rather than everybody staring at the altar or doing the thing kind of randomly, having one person act as the focal point in the virtual world.
That's a really good idea.
Because most
I don't
people
know if I've done a whole lot of
actual magic on the virtual world.
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of that. I've done, devotional, done class, done journey meditative work. Like we hop over to the astral temple and work together there. But I haven't done that necessarily. So I have another question for you, kind of to tag on to the last question.
Mhm.
This is my favorite question to ask people. So if you could do any project in the
Mhm.
future, it doesn't have to be something you've already formulated or started on. What's your dream project? What idea excites you the most that you want to accomplish at some point?
Huh. I'm going to pick something that is not one of the things that I've actually got planned that I'm going to absolutely do, because
Okay.
I've like another 13 books that I've doodled notes about. I've got many projects, but here's something that I don't know if I'm going to get to, but I would really like to. So I would like to, on my land, and perhaps convince other people, build shrines on their land or in their homes that are specifically portals for communing with the other side, whether that's spirits or the divine or whatever, so that you can have a place where somebody can sit before it and actually have a place that's a permanently easy to open and close opening between here and specific places, not just random places. Because I think that's a kind of shrine that we don't have enough of.
Oh, I don't know if we have a lot of that at all in the United States.
No, we don't. At least
That's
not made by and for our use. There's certainly
correct.
they're indigenous
That's
thing. They're not. They're indigenous places that function that way, but we don't have things like that.
that's a really interesting idea. And
Mhm.
if lots of people are doing that, then ooh, that's a very interesting idea. I hope you encourage people to do that.
I hope so someday. That was something that came in a vision sometime around 2000, and it still lingers in my head. So
I think I would like to see kind of from all different perspectives. I know what my map of the other worlds looks like, and I
Mhm.
know what my people in my tradition and my close friends that we talk about these sorts of things. But we do stumble across similar places, and I'm very curious to
Mhm.
to hear more people talk about, what's it look like over there for you? Where are you going exactly? What kind of energy is happening there? What can you do in this place? How do you get there? You know, um, I'd love that, and that could very well contribute to creating little access points to get to those various places.
Well, I mean, the first and foremost is that let's say that you're imagining some kind of gateway arch in front of you, or two
Mm-hmm.
pillars, or two stones, whatever, or whatever works for you. Now,
Mm-hmm.
imagine that you've done all the magic and done the things, and then you make it so that that arch or that portal opening is also the same as the astral temple portal opening that you've built, and basically have the astral temple version of it anchored to the physical world version of it, which then opens to the place that leads to a specific. You get the idea,
Mm-hmm.
it's the magic of making the physical world, the otherworldly planes that exist whether or not we're thinking about it, and the imaginal but real places that we create, like astral temples, be lined up to actually create a orderly and monitorable portal of connection or communion.
Well, and that's the whole idea of temple building, which I don't think we don't do that, or we haven't in a many
While
years. We don't have temples to whatever it may be, exactly like
right,
you're describing temples to the other
right.
world. Wonderful. Well, I hope to see that one day. I hope
I
to
hope
see
so
that.
too. I hope so too.
I would love to. We don't have as much resource, I think, as part of the problem. So hopefully, we can continue to be practical and put aside all of our issues in modern paganism around money and
I'm gonna simply remind folks that pagans are not poor. We are a cross section of the community. I think the reason pagans often think that they're poor is because we tend to interact with people of many different classes outside of what we would normally experience. So we experience the fact that many of our community are poor, but that's just the nature of the world. We're just a slice of the community, just like anybody else, and tend to be more educated and better. Actually, I think we're probably better paid overall, believe it or not.
Probably. I think our numbers may have something to do with that because I
Yeah.
live in Mississippi, so we've got a lot
Mhm.
of those huge mega churches with like their own jets right outside, and
Oh, I
then
know. I
you
know.
we're meeting at the local UU. So
I'm going to go in the other direction. And yet, many disenfranchised, oppressed communities manage to open storefront churches.
that's true. That's
I'm,
true.
I- I'm just going to say it's about shifting our relationship to how we use resources rather
Mhm.
than we don't have resources.
I like that. We'll get those temples. We'll get those temples built. So,
It'll happen.
where can our list? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
Oh,
cut you
no, no,
off.
no, no,
My
no. I was just saying it'll happen, and we are a relatively young movement. It's only been X number of decades that I can say that there's a movement.
agreed, and still stigmatized and villainized in different capacities in different areas as
Mhm.
well. So we're making a lot of progress in a
Oh,
short
yes.
time, a huge amount of progress. So where can our listeners find you if they would like to learn more? Read all his books, by the way, listeners.
I'd enjoy that. That would be great. But
Do
honestly,
it.
EvoDominguezJr.com. It's pretty easy. My whole name, all lowercase, .com. You can find me under my name on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. I have a TikTok account, but I haven't actually put anything there.
Well, excellent. We'll definitely link everything. We'll link your website in the show notes, and links to your most recent book that's out, The Four Elements of the Wise, and read all the others too. They're all great. The Keys to Perception is fantastic. Practical Astrology. I don't have the full name in my mind,
Don't
but
worry about
Practical
it.
Astrology is fantastic. Read them all. Read them all.
Cool.
Thank you so much for.
Thank
I've
you.
wanted you to come on the show. I have to work up my courage to ask people to come on the show, but I didn't have to with you. Thank you. That was a blessing. I'm so glad that you were here. And please come back anytime. We'd
Sure.
love to have you on the show.
That was
All
fun.
right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And we'll catch you next time. Blessed be. Thank you all so much for listening, and don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe through your favorite podcast provider. It helps us get our podcast in front of more listeners just like you. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can leave us a voicemail by clicking the link in the description of this episode, and you can always find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Crossroads and Cauldrons Podcast.